The mud was what stuck with me first. I know that sounds strange, but I've been driving these routes for going on 14 years now, and I know what a pull-off looks like. I know what mud looks like. This mud was different. I'd found this little overgrown access road just past the Laurel County line, tucked in where the Daniel Boone National Forest presses up against the highway. It wasn't on my GPS. It wasn't on any of my route maps. But I'd been hauling for going on 11 hours straight. My eyes were going, and the nearest rest area was still maybe 40 minutes north. So when I saw that break in the tree line, I took it. The ground was soft. Real soft. The rain had come through earlier that evening, and the whole forest floor was this thick, black mud. The kind that sucks at your boots when you walk through it. I could smell it the second I cracked the window. Rotting leaves and damp earth. That heavy, wet smell that sits in the back of your throat. The cold came in right behind it. And I don't mean regular cold. This was the kind of cold that felt like something pressing against you. Like it had weight to it. Now here's the thing. The mud was fresh. You could tell. It was still slick, still wet, the kind of surface that takes a print and holds it. And there wasn't a single track in it. Not one tire mark. Not one boot print. Not so much as a deer track. Nothing. Like nothing had ever pulled off that road before. Like the ground had just been sitting there, completely untouched, waiting. I should mention, I'm not the type to spook easy. My name's Hattie. Most folks in the trucking community call me Hard Drive, and I earned that name. I've been doing long-haul runs through the Appalachian Corridor since I was 22, and I've pulled off in some godforsaken places. Truckers know what I mean. You find a spot, you set your brakes, you sleep. You don't ask questions about the spot. I had my tire thumper with me. Heavy thing, custom engraved, walnut handle with my daddy's initials on it. He was a trucker too, drove for 30 years before his back gave out. Gave me that thumper when I got my first rig, and I've had it ever since. I tap it against my thigh when I'm restless. Just a habit. Something to do with my hands. I'd stopped because I needed rest, but I also needed to do a cargo check. I had a load of industrial equipment strapped down in the back, and the tarps had been flapping for the last hour, which meant something had shifted. Company policy says you do a walk around every time you stop for more than 15 minutes. Standard procedure. I figured I'd catch a few hours of sleep first, then do the check before I got back on the road. I was still wearing my boots because I hadn't even bothered to kick them off, which tells you something about how tired I was, because I once slept for 9 hours with my wallet digging into my hip rather than reach under myself to move it. My old gray jacket, the one I've had since I started driving, was bunched up under my head as a pillow. The moon was blocked out completely by the canopy overhead. I mean completely. The cab was so dark I couldn't see my own hands in front of my face. I had the sleeper curtains pulled shut, and I was lying there on my back on the mattress, and the crickets outside were going steady. But they were weird. I know how that sounds. Crickets are crickets, right? But these were synchronized. All of them hitting the same note at the same time on the same beat, like they were keeping time for something. I lay there listening to it for a while, tapping the thumper against my leg, and then I started to drift off. And that's when the humming started. It was faint at first. So faint I thought I was dreaming it. A woman's voice humming a lullaby. Not a tune I recognized. Something old. Something slow. It was coming from right outside the sleeper cab window, maybe 2 feet from where my head was lying. I sat there for a second, not moving, just listening. And I told myself it was the wind. I really did. Laurel County. The whole area is honeycombed with limestone caves. Hollow rock underneath the ground. Wind gets into those caves and it does things. It carries sound. It makes noises that sound like voices. I've heard it before in other parts of the state. It's a real thing that happens. So I lay there and I told myself it was the wind. Then, around 3 in the morning, everything stopped. The crickets, the humming, all of it, just gone. And the silence that came after was wrong. I don't mean quiet. I mean silent. The kind of silence that doesn't happen in a forest. There should have been something. Frogs, gulls, branches creaking, wind through the leaves. There was nothing. Like someone had turned the whole forest off. I was sitting up now, fully awake, my hand locked around the tire thumper. My mouth was dry and my pulse was going in my ears. I told myself the silence was normal. Forests go quiet sometimes. Animals settle. It happens. Then the humming stopped being replaced by silence and started being replaced by scratching. Soft, deliberate. Fingernails on the rubber door seal, moving from the bottom of the window to the top. Slow, like someone tracing a line. I sat bolt upright, both hands on the thumper. Couldn't breathe right. My chest had gone tight, like someone was pressing on it, and my shirt was damp under my arms even though the air was cold. I reached over and cracked the sleeper curtain. Maybe an inch, just enough to see through. There was a woman standing by the cab. She was right there, close enough that I could see her clearly in the faint light from the dashboard glow. She was facing the truck, but she wasn't looking at the door. She was looking at me, right at the spot where I was sitting, right at the crack in the curtain where I was looking out. She was wearing a shift, thin, ragged, the kind of thing you'd see in a history book, not on a person standing in the woods in the middle of a Kentucky night. It hung off her like it was made for someone taller. Her arms were bare, and the cold didn't seem to touch her. I didn't move. I kept telling myself there was a reason she was there. A hiker who got lost. Someone whose car broke down on the highway and she walked to find help. People do that. They find a truck and they knock on the door. It happens. But she wasn't knocking. She was just standing there, staring at me through the glass. Then she reached out and touched the window, and where her hand passed over the glass, frost bloomed. Thick, white frost, spreading out from her fingers like ice crystals forming in real time. I watched it crawl across the surface in every direction. This was July. Humid. Kentucky in the summer. There was no frost on anything. But there it was, spreading under her hand like she was dragging winter across the glass. I couldn't explain that. I sat there and I tried and I couldn't. There's no wind pattern in the world that makes frost appear on a window in July. And then I saw her eyes. They weren't reflecting the dashboard light. They should have been. There was enough glow to catch the moisture in a person's eyes, to make them shine the way eyes do when light hits them. Hers didn't. They were absorbing it, taking the light in and not giving any of it back. Like two holes in her face where the light went in and didn't come out. Now, anyone who's driven those mountain roads at night knows your eyes play tricks on you. You see things in the tree line. You convince yourself a stump is a person standing on the shoulder. I've done it 100 times. But this wasn't a trick. She was right there, maybe 4 feet from me, and her eyes were wrong. She moved her hand across the glass again, slower this time, feeling for something, running her fingers along the edge of the window frame where the seal met the metal. She was looking for a way in, and the way she moved, it wasn't the way a person moves. It was too smooth, too patient, like she had all the time there ever was and she wasn't in any hurry about any of it. I didn't wait. I threw myself into the driver's seat, jammed the key into the ignition, and turned it. The engine caught and roared, and the whole cab shook with it, and the woman went rigid. Just like that. 1 second she was moving, the next she was frozen. Completely still, like someone had hit pause. I slammed it into reverse, and for just a split second, as the gears caught, the humming came back. Right outside the window, loud. Like she was leaning in, right against the glass, humming that same lullaby directly into my ear. It lasted maybe a second, maybe less, but it was there and it wasn't the wind and I knew it. I punched the throttle. The tires spun in the mud, caught, and the truck lurched backward. I swung the wheel hard, found the access road, and hit the headlights. She was standing in the high beams. She hadn't moved. She was just standing there in the road watching me. And then, as I surged forward, her mouth opened. Slowly, wider than a mouth should open, and she screamed. But there was no sound. Not a single sound came out of her. But I felt it. I felt it in the frame of the truck. The whole cab vibrated, like a low-frequency pulse had passed through the metal, through the seat, through my chest. A silent scream that I couldn't hear but I could feel in my bones. I drove. I skipped the cargo check. I skipped everything. I hit the access road, found the highway on-ramp, and I didn't lift off the throttle until I saw the glow of a 24-hour truck stop off the interstate. I pulled in under those neon lights and I sat there in the cab with the engine running for maybe 20 minutes before my hands stopped shaking enough to get the door open. I never went back to that pull-off. I looked for it later on a daytime run through the same stretch and I couldn't find it. The break in the tree line wasn't there. The mud wasn't there. Like the road had just closed up behind me. I keep the cab lights on at every stop now. Every single one. I had the standard locks pulled off and replaced with heavy-duty chains, the kind you'd use on a warehouse door. My dispatcher asked me about it once and I just told him I had a run-in with a drifter. He didn't push it. I still dream about that scream. The one I couldn't hear but could feel. Every time I pass through Laurel County it comes back. Not the dream exactly. Just the feeling. That vibration in my chest. Like something reached inside the truck and pressed against my ribs. I don't know what she was. A ghost, maybe. Or something else. Something that had been sitting in that spot for a long time, waiting for someone to pull off the road and set their brakes in mud that had never been touched. I think about that mud a lot. The mud with no tracks. I chose that spot because it looked private. Like nobody else used it. And maybe that was the point. Maybe that clean, empty pull-off wasn't a sign that nobody had been there. Maybe it was a sign that nobody who stopped ever left to make tracks going back out. I could have gone another 5 miles. There's a rest area right off the highway, well lit, other trucks around. 5 miles. That's all that separated me from a normal night. I still drive those routes. I still pass through Laurel County. But I don't stop there anymore. And every time I see a break in the tree line that looks too clean, too quiet, too empty, I keep driving. Story break. Story 2. This second account comes from a woman who had a very different kind of problem. Hers wasn't something waiting in the woods. It was something she was already part of. I was the driver they called when nobody else would take the load. That's not something I say with pride. I want to be clear about that up front. But it's the truth, and the truth is where this starts. My name is Clara. I drove for a distribution company outside Louisville for the better part of 20 years. Big outfit, one of those hubs that sits out on the edge of the county where the city stops and the land flattens out. Jefferson County, Kentucky. The kind of place where the parking lot is always full at 3 in the morning and the lights never go off. I was what they called a fixer. When a load got flagged, when a driver refused to run, when something showed up on the manifest that made a man with a family look at the dispatcher and shake his head, they called me. And I took it. Every time. I didn't ask where it came from. I didn't ask where it was going. I signed the paperwork. I checked the seals and I drove. I was 53 when I started asking questions. I should have been asking them a lot sooner. I know that now. Let me tell you what the facility was like, because you need to understand why it took me so long. The hub was enormous. I mean, you could park 30 rigs in the loading bay and still have room to turn around. The air inside was always the same. Sterile. Cold. It smelled like ozone and floor wax, that sharp chemical smell that gets in your sinuses and stays. And the conveyor belts. They ran constantly. This low, steady hum that never stopped, never changed pitch. Like a heartbeat, you stopped hearing it after a while. It just became part of the walls. The workers were the thing I never got used to, though. They moved in sync. All of them. Like they were on a track. You'd see 10 of them coming down the corridor, all walking at the same speed, all turning the same corner at the same time. Nobody talked. Nobody laughed. Nobody stopped to scratch their nose or adjust their vest. They just moved. If it weren't for the fact that they were clearly breathing, I'd have said they were on rails. I told myself it was because the company ran a tight ship. Efficiency. Training. That's what I told myself. I had my granddad's pocket watch with me. It's been broken since 1974, the year he came out of the mines in eastern Kentucky for the last time. Doesn't tick, doesn't keep time. But I kept it in my pocket, and when my hands started going, I'd hold it, just close my fingers around it and feel the weight of it. It was the only thing I had left of his, and it steadied me. The first thing that didn't sit right was the manifests. Every load I picked up had a shipping manifest, standard paperwork. Origin, destination, contents, signatures. And the high-value loads, the ones nobody else wanted, they were always signed off by the same name. R. Delacourt. Same handwriting every time. Clean, precise, like someone had practiced it. I asked about Delacourt once. Casual. Just mentioned the name to a dispatcher. Asked if I should be reporting to him directly on the high-value runs. The dispatcher looked at me for a second too long, then told me Delacourt handled intake remotely. I let it go. A few weeks later, I was on the company terminal looking up my route history, and I searched the personnel database for the name. R. Delacourt. Nothing. No employee record. No badge number. No payroll entry. The name didn't exist anywhere in the system. I told myself it was a legacy issue. The company had been around since the 60s. They'd gone through 3 different computer systems. Half the old records never got migrated. Names got lost. A signature on a manifest from an employee who retired 15 years ago and never got cleaned out of the paperwork chain. That happens. The sloppy, but it happens. I kept driving. The containers were the next thing. I started noticing that the drop-off locations for the high-value loads were strange. I'd deliver to a warehouse address, a specific building with a number and a street, and the next day when I tried to look up the address again, it wouldn't be there. The map would show an empty lot, or a field, or nothing at all, like the building had been there for the delivery and then just wasn't. The first time it happened, I figured I'd written the address down wrong. The second time, I figured the map was out of date. The third time, I stopped figuring. I'd like to tell you I stopped driving then. I didn't. The checks were good. Better than good. A high-value run paid 3 times what a standard haul paid, and I was doing 2 or 3 of them a month. I told myself I was a professional. I told myself the origin and destination weren't my business. My business was getting the load from point A to point B safely and on time. That's what a driver does. That's all a driver does. I was telling myself that the night I heard the scratching. It was a run through the hills. Somewhere south of Elizabethtown, I think. 2-lane road. Dark. Nothing around but trees and the occasional farmhouse set back off the road. I'd been driving for maybe 2 hours, and I heard it. Faint. Coming from behind me. From inside the trailer. Scratching. Like fingernails on metal. Steady. Rhythmic. Not random. I turned the radio up. Turned it up loud, country station, something with a lot of fiddle. The scratching didn't stop. It just sat there underneath the music, steady as a clock. I told myself it was the cooling system. Some of the high-value containers had internal climate control. Fans, vents, regulators. Mechanical things that make noise. I told myself that for 100 miles. Then I hit a red light on the outskirts of a town I don't remember the name of, and the scratching stopped. And a voice came through the wall of the trailer. Said my name. Clara. Clear as day. Like someone was standing 6 inches from the other side of the metal, speaking through it. And it was a child's voice. Small. Young. Saying my name like they knew me. I sat at that red light and I stared at the trailer in my side mirror. The light turned green. I sat there. Someone behind me honked. I drove. I told myself it was a radio. Some kid on a CB, messing around, picking up frequencies. Kids do that. They get hold of a radio and they broadcast nonsense. I told myself that all the way to the drop-off. I told myself that while I unhooked the trailer. I told myself that in the parking lot of the gas station where I stopped to fill up. I was still telling myself that 3 days later when I saw the news. A missing person. A boy, 11 years old, vanished from a town about 40 miles from where I'd made my last drop-off. The report said he'd been gone for 5 days. The timeline matched my run. I was sitting in the break room at the hub when I saw it, on the television bolted to the wall in the corner. And I was sitting there watching that report when the conveyor belt stopped. All of them, at the same time. The hum that had been constant for 20 years just cut out, and the silence that replaced it was total. I looked around, and the workers were still moving, still in sync, still not talking. But the belts were silent, and the only sound was the ventilation and my own breathing. I went to the dispatcher's window to ask about it. He wasn't there. The supervisor was. A man named Mooney. He was standing behind the window watching me, and he said something I haven't forgotten. "Some crates are better left unexamined, Clara." He said it calm, flat, like he was telling me the weather. And the look on his face, it wasn't threatening. It was knowing, like he'd seen this before. Like I wasn't the first driver who'd heard things and started asking. And he already knew how this ended. The belts started back up about 30 seconds later. The workers kept moving. Nobody else seemed to have noticed the stop. I wish I could tell you I did something right then. I didn't. I went back to my truck. I sat in the cab. I held my granddad's watch in my hand, and I thought about that boy on the news, and I thought about the voice saying my name through the wall of the trailer, and I thought about the scratch marks I'd never actually seen but knew were there. And then I drove another run. I drove 3 more. I know how that sounds. I know what you're thinking because I've thought the same thing about myself 1,000 times. But the money was there, and the routine was there, and somewhere in my head I'd built this wall between what I suspected and what I was willing to do about it, and the wall held. It held right up until the night it didn't. The last run was a sealed container, same as always. Same manifest. Same R. Delacourt signature. Same dead-end address that would disappear by morning. But the scratching was worse this time. Louder. More desperate. Not rhythmic anymore. Frantic. Like someone was throwing themselves against the walls. Couldn't take it. I pulled off at a turnout about 10 miles from the drop-off. A dirt patch on the side of a county road. Trees on both sides. Nothing around. I got out of the cab with my flashlight and I walked to the back of the trailer, and I broke the seal. I opened the doors. The inside of the trailer was empty. No cargo. No crates. No parts. Nothing. But the walls were covered. Covered in scratch marks. Hundreds of them. Deep gouges in the metal. Some of them so deep they'd torn through the interior lining. And among the scratches, drawn in what I think was fingernail polish, maybe something else, I don't know, were maps. Hand-drawn maps of the highway system. Routes marked out. Exits circled. Rest areas highlighted. Like someone had been trying to find their way out by memorizing the road. Like someone had been riding in that trailer. More than once. For a long time. I stood there in the doorway of that trailer with my flashlight and I understood. I hadn't been hauling industrial equipment. I hadn't been hauling parts. I had been hauling people. I closed the doors. I got back in the cab. I drove the container to the drop-off, unhooked it, and left it there. Then I drove the rig to a truck stop about 20 miles east, parked it, took my bag, and walked away from it. I didn't call the police. I've thought about that decision every single day since. I had the evidence. I had the trailer. I had the manifests with a name that didn't exist. I could have driven straight to a police station and opened those doors and shown them what I'd found. I didn't. I walked away and I told myself it was because I was scared, because these people were connected, because if I talked they'd find me. And maybe that's true. But I also walked away because calling the police meant admitting what I'd been a part of. And I wasn't ready for that. I'm not sure I'm ready for that now. I changed my name. I moved to a small town in the Appalachian foothills, the kind of place that doesn't show up on most maps. I gave away the money. All of it. Every dollar I made from those high-value runs went to charities and shelters. I thought it would help. Didn't. I can't stand the sight of a shipping container. I see them on the back of flatbeds on the highway and I have to look away. I avoid the interstate at night. I haven't driven a truck in 3 years. And I think about those people. The ones I hauled. I never opened the doors while they were inside. I never let them out. I don't know if they were alive when I dropped them off. I don't know what happened to them after. I don't know if that boy from the news was in one of my trailers. I don't know if any of them are still alive. I gave away the money and I changed my name and I ran. But none of that changes what I did. I drove the truck. I drove it knowing. Maybe not the first time, but by the 3rd run, by the 5th, by the 8th, I knew. I knew and I kept the engine running. I live alone now. Small house, no neighbors for a quarter mile. Most days I'm fine. Most days I keep busy. I tend the garden, I don't think about it. But at night, when it's quiet, I hold my granddad's watch and I listen to the silence. And I wonder if the people in those containers are somewhere quiet too. Or if they're somewhere else entirely. I don't know if what I did makes me responsible for them. I didn't put them in there. I didn't open the doors to let them out. But I drove. And I knew. And knowing and still driving might be the same thing. The company is still operating. I checked, about a year ago. Same hub. Same location outside Louisville. Still hiring drivers. Still running high-value loads. Still signing manifests with a name that doesn't exist. I think about that sometimes. About the drivers they've got now. About the ones who are where I was, hearing things they don't want to hear, telling themselves the same stories I told myself. And I think about whether any of them will do what I couldn't. I still hear it sometimes, when I'm falling asleep. The sound of a small voice saying my name through a wall of metal. I don't think that sound is ever going to stop. Story break. Story 3. The last story in this video is the one I keep coming back to. The house smelled like old wood and dry hay, and the first time I walked through the front door, I almost turned around and walked back out. Not because of anything I saw. I didn't see anything wrong. Not then. It was more like a feeling. Like the house was expecting me, and I'd arrived at the wrong time. I need to back up. My name is Tess. I'm 31. I've been driving truck for about 6 years, mostly regional runs through Kentucky and Tennessee. When my uncle passed, he left me his house. It was a farmhouse, old, set back from the road outside Bowling Green, Warren County. My Uncle Ray had lived there alone for as long as I could remember. He'd been a trucker too, ran long haul for decades before his health went. When he died, the house came to me, and I didn't have anywhere else to go, so I moved in. I'd been between places at the time. My last apartment in Bowling Green had fallen through when the landlord sold the building, and I'd been sleeping in the cab of my truck for about 3 weeks. I was tired of it. I was tired of truck stop showers and fast food and parking under highway overpasses. So when the lawyer called and told me the house was mine, I said yes without thinking about it much. The house was old. Real old. I don't know when it was built, but the floors sloped and the windows were the kind with the wavy glass that makes everything outside look like it's underwater. Charming if you're into that sort of thing. I was not into that sort of thing, but it was free, so the walls were plaster, and in the summer heat, the whole place would creak and groan as it settled. It sounded like someone cracking their knuckles, but slower, like the house was stretching. The first few days were fine. I unpacked what little I had, set up the kitchen, aired out the bedrooms. The heat was brutal. Late summer in Kentucky, the kind of humid heat that sits on your chest and makes you feel like you're breathing through a wet cloth. I had the windows open, but there was no breeze. Just the smell of the hay field behind the house and the dry, musty smell of the old wood inside. I wear this locket, silver, real small, on a thin chain. It's got a picture of me inside it, from when I was maybe 8 or 9. I don't remember who gave it to me. I've had it as long as I can remember. When things feel off, when I can't tell if what I'm experiencing is real or if I'm just tired, I touch it. It grounds me, reminds me that I'm here, that I'm me, that whatever's happening is happening to a real person. I started touching it a lot after I moved into that house. The first wrong thing was the hallways. I don't mean they were scary. I mean they were wrong. The house was built on level ground, I checked. The foundation was solid. I had it inspected. But when you walked down the hallway from the kitchen to the bedroom, it felt like you were going downhill. Like the floor was tilted. Not enough to stumble, not enough to drop a ball and watch it roll. Just enough to feel it in your legs, in your inner ear. Like the house was very slightly leaning, and your body knew it even though your eyes said the floor was flat. I told myself it was the old construction. Houses settle. Floors warp. You get used to it. I found the logs about a week in. I was pulling up a loose floorboard in the den. The plank had been creaking every time I stepped on it, and I wanted to see if I could shim it. I pried it up, and underneath, in the gap between the joists, there was a stack of papers. Handwritten. Maybe 20-30 sheets, folded in half. I pulled them out and I read them. They were logs. Driving logs. Date, time, route number, mile marker, direction of travel. Written in pen, neat handwriting I didn't recognize. And as I read through them, I started to feel something I can't describe well. The routes were familiar. The mile markers were on roads I drove. The dates were recent, within the last month. I told myself it was Uncle Ray's. He was a trucker. He kept logs his whole life. Maybe he'd been tracking routes as a hobby after he retired. Maybe he'd been following my routes, keeping track of where I went because he was proud of me, because he was interested. Old people do that. They follow their families' lives from a distance. He probably found out my routes somehow and kept notes. I put the papers back under the floorboard and I tried to forget about them. A few days later, I found the keys. A set of truck keys, old, tarnished, on a ring with a leather fob. The fob had initials on it. My initials. TT. Not my uncle's initials. Mine. I found them in a drawer in the kitchen, in the back, behind a stack of old receipts. I'd opened that drawer 3 times already and they hadn't been there. I was sure of it. I put my own keys in that drawer when I moved in, and there had been nothing else in it. I told myself I was misremembering. I'd been tired. I'd been driving a lot. I probably just didn't notice them the first time. The journal came next. Another week went by, and I found a composition notebook in the cellar, tucked behind a shelf of old mason jars. The black and white marbled kind. I opened it, and the first page had my daily routine written out in detail. What time I woke up, what I ate for breakfast, which route I drove that day, where I stopped for fuel, what I listened to on the radio. Now, at this point, I was starting to feel something I can't name. Not fear exactly, more like a wrongness. Like everything in the house was one half-step off from where it should be, and I couldn't find the thing that was causing it. I touched the locket and I told myself the same thing I'd been telling myself. Uncle Ray was eccentric. He was a hoarder, maybe. He kept things. He was interested in my life. He wrote things down. Old people do strange things when they live alone for a long time. I also found a pair of work boots in the cellar that day. They were my boots. My old ones, the pair I'd thrown out 2 years ago because the sole had separated from the toe. I recognized the scuff mark on the left heel. I'd caught it on a trailer hitch at a rest stop in Tennessee, and it had left this specific crescent-shaped mark. Those boots shouldn't have been in that cellar. I'd thrown them in a dumpster behind a gas station in Paducah. I told myself I was losing my memory. I told myself maybe I'd brought them with me when I moved in and forgotten. I told myself a lot of things. Then I went back to the logs. I pulled the floorboard up again and I went through the papers more carefully. And this time I looked at the dates. The earliest log was dated 7 years ago. 7 years. I'd been driving truck for 6. I hadn't even gotten my commercial license 7 years ago. I was still working at a warehouse in Bowling Green, loading other people's trucks. The logs tracked routes I hadn't driven yet. Mile markers on highways I wouldn't start running for another 2, 3 years. Stops at truck stops I'd never heard of at the time but that I now stopped at regularly. And the later logs, the ones from the last few months, they didn't just track my routes. They tracked my conversations. There were notes. Tess called dispatch at 2:30 in the afternoon, asked about the Murfreesboro run. Tess stopped at the Pilot on exit 65, bought a coffee and a pack of gum. Tess argued with her boss about the maintenance schedule on Truck 4. Those were real conversations, real events, things I had said and done on the road, hundreds of miles from that house, and they were written down in handwriting that wasn't mine, on papers that had been hidden under the floor for what looked like years. The ink was old. The paper was yellowed at the edges. These weren't recent notes. They'd been written a long time ago. I sat on the floor of the den with those papers in my lap and I touched my locket and I tried to understand what I was looking at. And I couldn't. I could not make it fit into anything I understood about how the world works. The house settled around me while I sat there. Those slow, cracking sounds. Like bones. Like the house was shifting its weight. Getting comfortable. Like it had been waiting for me to find the logs and now it could relax because I was finally catching up. I know how that sounds. I know. I'm not saying the house was alive. I'm saying it felt like it was. I spent the next 2 days going through every room, every drawer, every closet. I found more. A photograph of my truck, my specific truck, the VIN visible on the dashboard, taken from an angle that could only have been from inside the cab. A receipt from a restaurant in Nashville dated 3 years ago, stapled to a page of notes describing what I'd ordered. A weather report from a day I'd been stranded in a storm in eastern Kentucky, with handwritten notes about which exit I'd taken to wait it out. All of it old. all of it predating my arrival at the house by years. The wrongness was everywhere now. The hallways that tilted, the way the house settled, the smell of dry hay that seemed to come from inside the walls, not from the field outside. The way the temperature in the den was always 3 or 4 degrees colder than the rest of the house, even with the vents open. And the sounds, not the settling, something else, a soft click, mechanical, coming from somewhere under the floor. It would happen, and then a few minutes later it would happen again, like something turning on and off, on and off. I found the hatch on a Thursday. I'd moved the desk in the den to get at the baseboard, and when I pushed it aside, there was a seam in the floor that didn't match the rest of the planks. It was a hatch, cut into the floor, fitted with a recessed handle, painted to blend in. I'd walked over it every day for 3 weeks and never seen it. Pulled it open. Below was a crawl space, small, maybe 6 feet by 8, windowless. A wooden ladder led down into the dark. I went down. I know that going down into a hidden crawl space in a house that's been tracking your life for years is the last thing a sensible person would do. But I wasn't being sensible. I needed to know. I needed to see what was under there because the alternative was living above it and not knowing, and I couldn't do that anymore. The crawl space had a desk. An old metal desk with a lamp clamped to the edge. And on the desk was audio equipment. A receiver, a recorder, a set of headphones, and a tangle of wires that ran up through the floor joists and into the house above. The equipment was running. The reels were turning. The lights were on. And there was a low hum, barely audible, that I realized was the sound of microphones picking up the air from the rooms above. Every room, the kitchen, the bedroom, the den, the bathroom, the clicking I'd been hearing, that soft mechanical sound. It was the recorder, cycling on and off, on and off. I sat down at the desk and I put on the headphones. The most recent recording was queued up, the reel positioned at the start of a segment. I pressed play, and I heard my own voice. From that morning, that exact morning, I heard myself making coffee. I heard the kettle. I heard me talking to myself the way I do when I'm alone, saying things out loud to organize my thoughts. I heard myself say, I think I'm going to sell this place. I can't stay here anymore. I had said those words in the kitchen, 3 hours earlier, to nobody, to the empty room, and they were on a recording, on a reel that had been turning in a crawl space under my feet, recorded by equipment that had been installed before I ever set foot in that house. The house had been listening to me, from the moment I arrived, maybe from before I arrived. I pulled the headphones off. I climbed the ladder. I closed the hatch. I put the desk back over it. And then I walked out the front door, got in my truck, and drove. I didn't pack. I didn't call anyone. I didn't go back inside. I turned the key, pulled out of the driveway, and I didn't stop until I crossed the state line into Tennessee. I never went back. I had a lawyer handle the estate. I told him to sell the property. When it didn't sell, I told him to have it torn down. He asked me why. I didn't give him a reason. I just told him to do it. He sent me a letter a few months later saying the demolition was complete. He mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that the contractor had found something unusual in the crawl space under the den. He didn't specify what. He said the contractor had removed it and disposed of it. I didn't ask what it was. I didn't want to know. I still feel it. Not the house, not exactly, but the feeling of being listened to. I'll be sitting in my apartment, the one I rent now in Nashville, and the room will go quiet, and I'll feel this pressure in my ears like the air has changed, like something has turned on. And I'll touch the locket and tell myself it's nothing, that I'm in a new place, that nothing followed me. But I don't know that. I don't know that nothing followed me. I think about Uncle Ray a lot. He lived in that house for 30 years. He drove truck, same as me. He kept to himself. He never married, never had kids. He was a quiet man, the kind who'd wave from the porch but never invite you in. And I think about the equipment in that crawl space. It was old. Some of it was decades old. The recorder was a reel-to-reel unit, the kind that hadn't been manufactured since the 70s. But it had been maintained. It had been serviced. The belts were fresh. The heads were clean. Someone had been taking care of it for a long time. Uncle Ray drove truck. He wasn't an audio engineer. He didn't know how to wire a house for sound. He didn't know how to install microphones in plaster walls. Someone had taught him, or someone had done it for him, or someone had been using him the same way they were using me. I think about that. About Uncle Ray living in that house for 30 years, sleeping above that crawl space, being recorded the same way I was being recorded. And I wonder if he knew. If he went down that ladder and put on those headphones and heard his own voice coming back to him. And if he did, why he stayed. Or if he didn't stay because he wanted to. If he stayed because he was supposed to. Because the house needed someone to live in it. To listen to record. And I wonder who set up the equipment before Uncle Ray. And who set it up before them. The locket in my hand is warm from my skin. I've been holding it since I started talking about this. The picture inside is of me at 8 years old. I'm smiling. I'm at a kitchen table. I don't remember that kitchen. I don't remember that table. I don't remember who took that picture.